At the last episode, we were still on the case study, the sales clinic case studies, and we were looking at the company G Power, that provide energy infrastructure solutions and are based out of Lagos. And for those of you who are just joining, the whole thrust of the session was to see how we could help G Power find customers who can afford them. And after a couple of questions and looking through some scenarios, we discovered that the problem was a prospecting one and a qualifications one. In other words, that means one of not just looking for people to talk to, but being sure that you are speaking to the right kind of people. Excuse me, speaking to people who are qualified to hear what it is that you have on offer. And so part of the solution involves having a questioning framework that would help you to ask more questions so that you know who it is that you're dealing with. So if I remember correctly, I believe that is where we've been in the last couple of episodes, maybe the last 4 or 5, in looking at this case study about finding customers who can afford you. So the agenda today is to go over examples of money conversations, money and budget conversations, because those are key to making sure that you are speaking with the right person, that the person is qualified for both of you to spend time with each other. It's not just protection for you; it's also protection for the potential customer. Because if truly all he can afford is 150 naira solution, then there's no point in both of you spending 2 hours together having a conversation if the solution that you provide is 500 naira. So these are conversations that folks do not normally like to have, no matter what kind of business it is that you're involved in, especially for those of us who are involved in the event and wedding space, because we take our craft really personal, and so having money conversations can seem really tasking and really challenging. So wedding photographers, we take our art really personal. Wedding planners, we take it that our credibility is on the line, and so we don't take too kindly to these sorts of conversations, because if you start off the money conversations and it looks like people are haggling back and forth, the wedding planner often takes it that it's your professional integrity and your credibility that is being slighted, and the same thing with the wedding planner. And it's not necessarily the case. People are just trying to assess the pros and the cons of what the offering happens to be and trying to bring it within their own monetary expectations. So step one, for all the listeners to the podcast, especially for those of us in the wedding space, just chill and keep it cool. Don't take any of these exercises personal, because at the end of the day, it's not about you. In most cases, it's about what your business offering is. It's about the product or the service. So don't be offended when you start off these conversations and it looks like the brides and grooms, if they are pricing market or if they're pricing groundnut. Don't take it personal. Let's just be a professional. Let's be above board. And let's get the show on the road. So today, I'm going to look at 3 or 4 specific questions that you could use to get the money and the budget conversation going. Now, it might sound as if some of these questions are coming right out of nowhere, but I'm going to assume that you've already had previous conversations with your prospective client, and so you guys have built up a certain level of rapport. And if you have, then asking these questions are not going to seem that strange. Now, remember that for the case study, the fellow that we're using, G Power, is in the energy space. He's not in the wedding space. So the initial questions that I've crafted are related to what it is that he sells, which are inverters, batteries, solar panels, those sorts of things. But we can adapt them to the wedding space. And that's also the reason why I say that when it comes to learning about sales and marketing and those sorts of things, it pays a lot to pay attention to what happens in other industries, because with some creativity, we can adapt their thought processes and their templates to what we do in the wedding space. So on with the questions. So one of the questions that I suggested that Godwin of G Power should ask was to ask them, Madam or Mr. and Mrs. Customer, have you done some research on batteries and inverters before? Now, the goal of that question, have you done some research on ... is to get a sense of the figures that they have come up with. So if you ask, Madam, have you done some research on batteries and inverters before? And they say, oh yes, I was speaking to Okechukwu and Sons, and he said that he has a sine wave inverter of this kind of battery, and he was going to give it to us at 50K. Already, you have a sense of what ballpark these people are playing with, and you know that if all the solutions that you offer are, in the 150K to 200K range, then at this point, you know that you either have to weave out of the conversation because the research that they have been doing is in a much lower range, or you know that you have some work to do to educate them up on what the better quality specs are that are going to be able to solve their energy problems. And so it's the same with those of us in the wedding space. So some wedding photographers have a problem asking that, but it's a question that I have no problem asking. I don't flinch. So I just ask, so who else have you speaking with? What research have you done? And if they start talking about the average run-of-the-mill guys, the people who spray and pray, it also gives a sense of the kind of quality of photography that they're looking for. And so asking these sorts of questions are already giving us a sense of what they have in mind and setting up the expectations on both ends. So if they say, yes, I've been doing some research, I went to UTC, that's a red flag. Because in Abuja, UTC is it's an area, it's part of the, should I say, the commercial district in Abuja, where we have lots of people who do photography work, framing, lots of artists and things like that. But it's known for not being an upscale part of town. So if you ask this question up front, and all the studios and all the artists and all the people that they're referring to happen to be in UTC or that part of town, and you want to be one of these wedding event professionals who is delivering a really upscale, sophisticated kind of wedding experience, then right from the get-go you already know that your expectations are too far off, and so you either exit the conversation or you try and educate them up and try and bring them up to where you are in terms of expectations. Although, like I pointed out when discussing the battery scenarios, it's going to be a lot of work to try and educate somebody up from 50K to 300K. If, on the other hand, the expectations that they have are around the 50K mark, and your solution happens to be, let's say, 60 or maybe 70K, there's some room, there's some give. You can bring them up, you can come a little lower, and you guys can have a meeting of the minds and do business with each other. So that's one of the questions that you can ask. Have you done any research on blah, blah, blah before? Or who else are you speaking with? So for wedding planners, you can ask, oh, thank you very much for coming to the stand today. Or are you the one who's getting married? Oh, okay, what date do you have in mind? Okay, December the 26th. That is fantastic. So who else have you been speaking with? Just go right up and ask. You will be surprised at the level of information that people give when you ask a question. The tip that I'll give is when you ask a question, just keep quiet. Most people are uncomfortable with silences, and so if you ask your prospective customer a question and you keep quiet, they're going to fill in the silence. They'll get talking, and then you'll start getting a sense of what the money expectations are. Another question that I ask that folks think is too direct, but I don't think it's too direct. I just go out from the beginning and I ask, how much have you allocated for this? How much have you allocated for the pre-wedding shoot? How much have you allocated for the wedding? If you're a wedding planner, actually, I think wedding planners have more leeway when it comes to these sorts of things. I think you guys in a situation to ask right from the beginning in the first meeting, since after all, managing the overall budget is a key part of your scope of reference. So I think you guys are in a position to be able to ask right from the beginning, like, okay, so how much are you allocating for this wedding? Are you guys setting aside 3 mil for everything, 10 million for everything, 15 mil for everything? Forgive me, I'm just pulling figures out of my head. I have no idea about what realistic wedding budgets are. But bottom line is, you can go out and ask these questions. Of course, you'll be met with different kinds of responses. Like I think one guy told me, he just laughed and looked at me and he said, "Oh, so you can scam me, Abby?" But I was able to take the conversation from there and, got him to understand that no, this was not about scamming or just playing. I'm just trying to get a sense of what the expectations are. Because heading into these things, we have to be sure that we both have the right expectations when it comes to money and the scope of the work and things like that. And I also pointed out that actually it's in his best interest that we get right into the numbers right now instead of going into the whole song and dance of you guys come and visit today and then look at samples and say, okay, we'll talk later, and then you come and visit again, and after 5 or 6 visits it's getting awkward. You guys are trying to fade, or I'm pushing too hard to try and close the deal. So let's get money expectations right up front and center. And then another technique that I use is bracketing and arranging questions when it comes to discussing money and budget conversations. So for G Power, I suggested that he could ask Mr. and Mrs. X, our happiest customers usually spend between 1.5 million and 2.3 million to fully solar power a 5-bedroom flat for 24 hours. Is that something you guys are prepared for? So if you notice in this scenario, there's a range, 1.5 million to 3 million. And of course, you're going to get a number of responses. Some people will say 1.5 to 2.3, okay, it's doable. Although I'm hoping it's more like the 1.5 side, and then you guys laugh over it, and then you start discussing specifics. And then, of course, there's some people who are going to say 1.5 million, Lord have mercy. In fact, let me be going. In that case, you can ask a little bit more, a few more questions. Like when people say, Jesus, in that case, let me be going. You can ask some follow-up questions. The earlier questions that I asked, like, haven't you done any research before? Haven't you spoken to anyone before? You shouldn't be surprised at the price. Said, no, I haven't spoken to anyone. I just saw your advert on Instagram, and so I decided to call. And yeah, you can give them a bit of homework at that point. Like, oh, okay, then why don't you go around and ask around? And when you do a little bit of research, you will find that the budget range that I've given you for 1.5 to 2.3 actually is a very realistic budget. And then we can take the conversation further then. So, Mrs. Okechukwu, would it be okay if I call you back in 2 weeks' time after you've done some shopping around? And the answer will either be yes or either will be no. But either way, there are questions at our disposal about how to move the process forward. So the same applies for those of us who are wedding industry professionals. So as a wedding planner, you can ask from the get-go. Mr. and Mrs. Bride and Groom, our happiest customers usually spend between 1 to 5 million to have the wedding planned of their dreams. For those of you who live in Kubwa, is that something that you guys are open to? And the same for wedding photographers. Our happiest customers usually spend between 500,000, 250,000, or whatever it is your price range is to have the wedding covered. We're going to have a team of 4 wedding photographers and a book and 6 frames and this and this and that and that. Is that something that you're prepared for? Is that a realistic budget for you? And you get the conversation going from there. Now, these are just some examples that I have used in my own previous experience. I don't have an extensive catalog of questions that I use because it depends on who it is that you're talking to, the level of rapport that you've built up with them, the level of sophistication of the client who is in front of you. So there are no hard and fast rules. But the bottom line is you need to have a framework in mind, and you need to have a sense of what kind of questions that you're going to ask. So these are 3 questions that have served me well in the past, and which I handed over to G Power, and I think you guys can use as well when trying to have the money and budget conversation, so that we can set expectations about how much it's going to cost and what the scope of work is going to be. Have you done some research on XXXXX before? How much have you allocated for this project? And you can also ask bracketing and ranging questions. It could cost anything between 50,000 and 150,000. Does that range sound okay with you? Is that within the ballpark of what you expect? Are you good with that? Is that something you can afford? So just find your own verbiage. Find ways that blend with your own, with your personality and with the context and with the person that you happen to be speaking to at the time. So I'll wrap this up here. In the next episode, we'll go into questions that you can use to gauge how much urgency that there is in the situation. Because, like I've pointed out lots of times in the past, it doesn't matter that you're speaking to a bride right now in December of 2020. If her wedding is going to be in 2023, there is no magic that you can pull to get her to move the process along or to get her to be overtly interested. Because for the average person, the difference between 2020 and 2023 is a very, 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 very long time. So yes, I know that for the photographer or for the wedding planner, even if it's, well, people have different areas of comfort. I know some people who are comfortable receiving a deposit 1 year out. I think for me, that's the max that I'm willing to pursue. But I've met some people who have no problem accepting deposits 2 years out. Well, actually, I should speak to some business consultants and find out what the best, what kind of time frames are ideal when it comes to accepting deposits and committing yourselves to future projects. Yeah, but for me, that's my maximum comfort level. A year out, we're talking about December next year, and you want to drop, 100K to book the date, then hey, no problem. Let's go ahead and do that. So in the next episode, we're going to be looking at urgency questions. For this episode, we've looked at money and budget conversations. If you haven't been direct in using these sorts of questions before, give it a try. You'll be surprised. These things work. But just remember, number 1, do not take it personal. It's not about you. It's about the service. So when they say 1.5 million, why are you trying to build house? It's not a personal slight against you. You're a sales professional. Keep it in the conversation. And also remember that when you ask these questions, people are uncomfortable with silences. So ask the question. Don't fidget. Don't try and don't fidget. Just ask the question and keep quiet. Let them speak. You've gotten some information. And the previous conversations that we had about the communications loop, this is where it all comes in handy. So you listen, get information, ask questions to be sure that you understand correctly, and you begin the whole cycle all over again. So thank you very much, guys, for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based photographer Tavishima Ayede. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. I really appreciate it, and I love you guys. I'll catch you at the next episode where we'll be looking at examples of urgency questions.